What's up, poopers? Welcome to my Black Desert Online guide to Valkyries! I was originally going to put her in a video with Warrior together, but the classes are just too different. So let's learn about the female warrior first. Boop. Valkyries are a class that use swords in their main hand and shields in their offhand. This sword type is the same that warriors use, but different from tamers, ninjas, and bladers. For resources, they use stamina and divine power, or DP. DP is something generated from most of her attacks and used by her more powerful attacks. A Valkyrie's basic attack is called Valkyrie Slash, bound to your left mouse button. Its main use is to generate divine power and can be skilled to maneuver the swings in different ways. If you hold down your up key and left click, you will cast forward dash and move towards your swing. If you sprint forward and then swing, you will cast a skill called Charging Slash. And if you hit your A or D keys while swinging, you will spin the target around and knock them slightly while lunging in the direction you were pressing. All of these skills can be ranked for more damage, more divine power generation, and some for more attack speed. She'll also start with the ability to trade her stamina for divine power by holding shift and the spacebar to channel the spell. It's good for situations where you need full divine power but have nothing to hit. Higher ranks increase the divine power gained. For mobility, she's got the typical evasive roll. Like most classes, it is suitable by holding shift and the direction you want to roll or double tapping forward. So before we get into her attack stuff, let's learn about the Valkyrie's shield business, as it is a big part of her playstyle. By default, Valkyrie will be able to block incoming attacks by pressing Q. Like other blocking classes, blocking damage will reduce your block durability, and if this hits 0, you'll lose the ability to block temporarily. But the durability regenerates anytime you are not blocking. Holding block for a short time will provide you with a defense bonus, and blocking attacks will generate divine power. The first component with block is counter. Usable after blocking an attack, you can counter by hitting your right mouse button to stun targets. By default, outside of block, your right click will be a skill called Shield Strike. This skill flips enemy around and generates divine power, and at max rank can stun enemy for 2 seconds as well. Holding shift while right clicking will allow you to use a skill called Shield Push once it's learned. This skill will deal the damage of Shield Strike but instead knock enemies back. Next up is Shield Throw, and this skill is pretty useful for early leveling and grinding AoE monsters. It throws your shield out by holding S and Q, doing damage, spinning and stunning targets, though not effectively in PvP. The skill can be used on cooldown but will not stun when done so. It can have a secondary component that allows you to hold the right mouse button after throwing it to spin the shield in place, doing damage that scales off of your shield strike rank. Just Counter is a skill usable while in blocking stance by holding W and left clicking. This skill will generate divine power and put a bleed effect on targets while keeping block up. The divine power generated by this skill is a lot, but if used while it's on cooldown, it will drop guard and not stagger enemies. A secondary component skill will add a double strike to the first swing. Then we've got Skyward Strike, a forward lunge casted by either sprinting forward and hitting right click or pressing the spacebar while guard is up. Using the skill removes guard and will knock enemies airborne while generating a lot of divine power but cannot be used on cooldown. Lastly, we've got Shield Chase, and this is an important mobility skill for Valkyrie. It can be used while in guard or used out of any of the mentioned shield attack skills by holding shift and a direction to dash in that direction. Note that after the dash you will instantly be in guard, so you can combo it out of another shield attack move to put on guard instantly. But if you hold shift, you will sprint and break the guard, so make sure to let go of shift after you've casted this. The skill does not ignore collision unless you are using it backwards. Thus, if you want to move through enemies using this skill, you will have to spin your camera around and press S shift while your shield is up or after you use a shield attack. Now that's it for shield stuff. Let's look at her kick skills next. Holding F will cast flurry of kicks that knocks enemies back and airborne, generating divine power. Higher ranks deal more damage and add more divine power generation. Hitting the S key while pressing F or pressing F while sprinting will cast Flying Kick, jumping at enemies and kicking them back to also generate divine power up to 70 at max rank. For passives, Valkyrie will spend 3 points to gain defensive power and HP, the defensive power alternating from melee to range to magic each time you skill it. and like most classes passives, it'll be a no-brainer to take these. She also has a sustain skill that will heal herself, give herself movement speed, and restore divine power. The skill will also heal nearby allies for a lesser amount and has a 40-second cooldown at max rank that makes grinding with no downtime pretty easy. Alright, now time for sword stuff. Valk is somewhat unpopular because of her reliance on her shield and her lack of flashy combos. Almost all of her abilities are standalones, so let's start with Severing Light. Castable by pressing both left and right click keys simultaneously, the skill will swing wide at enemies in front and spin them around while spending divine power and restoring HP. Higher ranks increase its damage pretty high and the health returned, and its final component allows you to swing a second time with the right click during the first swing to knock all the spun around enemies onto their backs. Next is Sword of Judgement. By hitting your S key and right clicking, you will begin lunging at your targets into a 3-hit swing, each swing draining SP. If you land the third hit, it will knock enemies down and deal massive damage that scales off of your current divine power. The skill does not have a cooldown, but it's recommended to keep your divine power up between casts of the skill if you choose to use it. An extra component can be added to the skill to add an extra attack after the last strike. And counter is a simple upswing attack used by holding your S key and left mouse button, lunging and lifting enemies. Though if used on cooldown, it loses its lift component. Sharp Light, cast by holding shift and left click, is a quick stab attack that knocks down. It loses its knockdown when used on cooldown and costs divine power, but also generates divine power if it lands and can be spammed, so. It has a 100% crit rate, but it gets half damage when used on cooldown, and at max rank its range can be increased to hit further away. Next, let's cover Punishment. Used by pressing E to grab opponents and slam them into the ground, doing massive damage to a single target and knocking down nearby enemies as well. This is a great skill for PvP, but not so shiny in PvE, as you'll mostly be AoE grinding or fighting bosses. The skill can be used to flinch bosses, but you're not exactly strong enough to lift up giant imps with one hand. Casted with Shift and F is Divine Power, a slow swing that will knock down all enemies in a large area. At higher ranks, it will reduce the target's attack speed as well and do more damage based off of your current divine power. And it gets a final component that allows the skill to be held to bounce targets on the ground and keep them there for a bit. Heaven's Echo, bound to Shift Q, is by all intents and purposes the AoE taunt skill of the Valkyrie, drawing the aggro of all nearby enemies onto herself. It also will grant a defense buff to herself and a lesser buff to nearby allies, but if you use it on cooldown, it will not give the buff. Righteous Charge is a nice gap closer of the Valkyrie. This skill is used by holding W and pressing F. Higher ranks will increase travel speed and distance and damage, but max rank adds a divine power scaling damage component as well as an explosion knockback effect. And you may want to opt out of knocking the enemy back if you are using this skill as a gap closer. Glaring Slash is next, and this is an awesome skill, cast by holding both mouse buttons and S key. The skill's main purpose is its ability to suck all enemies into each other into a nice neat pile. This makes grouping them up very easy to guarantee they are all in front of you for blocking their attacks or to hit them all at once. It has no cooldown and its range and damage goes up with rank, as well as making the final hit scale with the Valk's max divine power. Let's talk about Celestial Spear next. Holding Shift and E will call down a spear from the sky down on an enemy, knocking it down. Now this skill cannot be used on cooldown, and the main reason you'll want to use the skill is for its effects. The first effect is that it will buff your crit rate by 80% at max rank for 5 seconds, and it will slow the target hit by 30% for 10 seconds. It's also only got a 7-second cooldown, so if you keep this buff up, you can crit for days, and it's great for slowing targets that keep running away. 3 skills left. First, she's got a neat little group buff hidden off to the side of her skill tree. It has a 3-minute cooldown and buffs herself and nearby allies with tons of resistances and armor for 6 seconds, making them hard to CC for the duration, but it must be put on the skill bar to be used. Then we've got Shining Dash. Also requiring our handy skill bar, this is a forward dash skill on a 40-second cooldown that dashes and hits targets multiple times, dealing massive damage, with a 100% crit rate, and if the final hit lands it will knock down. This is a great single target PvP skill as a finisher or boss kill, but its long cooldown means you need to be careful about how you use it. It'll also consume Black Spirit energy at 200% for even more damage. And lastly, the 100% Black Spirit energy user, Judgement of Light. This is Valk's only real cool flashy spell that calls down beams of light to do damage to enemies. A strong AoE skill for finishing groups of monsters. While casting it, it will auto-use guard, but guard drops after the spell is done, and its main use is just its huge damage burst and end knockdown component. Using it with the Black Spirit energy will cause it to do tons of AoE damage to everything around the Valkyrie. So let's go into playstyle. Valk doesn't have much in the way of mobility, so instead of dodging most of the time, it's good to make use of her block skill. She's great at controlling monsters and taking no damage from them, making her one of the best farming classes in the game. Her damage can come from multiple sources. As for leveling, I found personally the easiest was to just throw the shield using shield throw, spamming it over and over to hit monsters far away, group them up, and kill them in 1 to 2 hits. It's really her only attack with range on it. Alternatively, you can group up monsters using glaring slash and hit them with other combo attacks such as Sword of Judgment. For PvP, you'll once again rely heavily on your guard and wait for the opportunity to gap close and CC targets using your shield stuns or grab skills. Blocking at the right times to make sure your block durability never hits 0 is pretty important, so is using your gap closers and CCs at the correct times. Bosses are somewhat simple. For solo, you can use a shield to block their strikes and hit in between with your hard-hitting attacks. For group bosses, you'll play the role of the tank to stop the bosses from chasing squishy classes that deal more damage when they don't have to worry about getting hit in the face. For gearing, just go for the Uria and Laverto weapons like most classes do for their weapons, and for armor, you can go for Neils for damage or try out Rotary or Heavies for tankiness, depending on what you're trying to do. And that's it! Valk is on the more simple side, but she does take a lot of finesse to master the aspects of her play that at first glance may seem simple, such as knowing when to use her gap closers and guards. Next, I'll be going into ninjas and koinichis, but until then, I am booping out. Boop.